Every startup I've had, particularly the venture-backed ones where you feel like you're running on the treadmill, I had many moments where I'm like, I wish I could just reset and like it's never happened and I'm just doing a regular job. I remember during that period, it was bad. My health gets really bad in those situations too. So it's like a combination of things. I stop exercising, I start eating poorly. You may not be physically like writing an email, but you're at your kid's birthday party while you're talking to some other dad, you're thinking about some release in the back of your head. That's not an engaged conversation. You become disengaged.
That is a little preview from my guest today, Raj Singh. Raj is a total badass. He's like a multi-time founder. I can't even list off all the companies, but I'll just share a few from his highlight reel. He was co-founder of Tempo AI, which was acquired by Salesforce. He co-founded All the Cooks, which was acquired by CookPad. And his most recent startup is called Pulse, which was acquired by Mozilla, which is where he's currently their VP of product, leading all of their new initiatives. His resume speaks for itself. So I was super excited to have him on the show. Hear his journey and double click on a few of the tough moments that he's encountered along the way in his entrepreneurial journey. If you're new here, I'm Andrew, and this is what this show is all about. We invite on amazing guests, and we hear about some of the challenging moments in their career. So that's what we got into with Raj. We talked about the time when he first got called into HR, like before he started his own businesses and he was doing them on the side. One of his bosses basically noticed he was building something and they called him into HR. They forced him to resign. He shared the time that he was leveled by a VP. He was like a senior director. They hired a VP above him. He ended up leaving that company shortly after, and we talked about that. And we talked about how he managed the fallout after one of the toughest decisions that he's ever made as a founder that almost cost him a co-founder in the process. Personally, my favorite part was hearing Raj talk so openly and honestly and vulnerably about the realities and challenges of being a founder, especially a VC-backed founder, how it impacts your mental health, your life outside of work. So you got a little bit of a preview of that in the intro here. We go into way more depth. All right, that is enough from me. Let's go ahead and hear from Raj.
So I'm from the Bay Area, so not the most unique place in the tech community. The Bay Area has changed a lot. So I grew up in South San Jose, and South San Jose was, if you think about Silicon Valley, people think, for those not from tech or in the Bay Area, they might think San Francisco. But Silicon Valley was really like Santa Clara. It was like South Bay. And San Jose had Almaden Research Center from IBM. And I grew up mostly in Almaden Valley, which is South San Jose. Dad was in tech as a mathematician. So this is before Excel era. They would have people on staff who just do math. And worked at IBM, worked at a lot of those old school tech telecom companies, Nortel later in his career, whatnot. And it was a very different vibe. Like tech was not an industry that you would call like just tech. There's still this term like IT. There was the .com boom that I saw when I was in high school, going to college, but didn't really understand it. Never really talked stock market, finance. My dad wasn't really a technical person. He was a mathematician, later became a professor, and that's what he's still doing today. And over the period of the last 2 decades, and a lot of folks in San Francisco kind of call this out, there's an entire NIMBY, YIMBY, all these sort of movements within the Bay Area because of this regentrification, and the tech community has sort of taken over and whatnot. But it's really changed. Now we're like this like Uber tech hub. You don't really meet people outside of tech anymore. Like almost everyone you meet is involved in tech in some shape or form. It's different. In some ways, the culture and the vibe has changed. I mean, I generally love it and I have no regrets. I'm a builder. And so it's like, if you're an actor, actress, you want to be in Hollywood. If you're in finance, you're probably going to move to New York. But if you're in tech, you should be in the Bay Area, right? You got the best people around you. So I enjoy it. But it's been interesting seeing that change and seeing how the communities have changed too.
And have you always been a builder? Like if we could go back in time, like were you starting businesses like in middle school and in high school? Like has that always been inside of you?
I maybe not as intentional as it's been today, but in high school, I recall like my first sort of business was people were going into colleges, like we're all going to college, and they just rolled out Ethernet, like for internet access. This is like pre-Wi-Fi era. And most people's desktop computers, because you're supposed to take like a desktop computer to college, didn't have an Ethernet port, because unless you bought your computer like post 1998, 99, and I was going to college in 97, didn't have an Ethernet port. So I would basically go and buy these Ethernet cards from Fry's Electronics, which is like an old famous electronics store of the Bay Area, unfortunately now shut down, destroyed through Amazon and whatnot. And I would go and install for $50 or $75 an Ethernet card into their computer. And the card would cost me like $10, $15. and it took me like an hour, and it was like a great little business. I probably internet enabled a bunch of desktop computers. That's kind of like the first sort of little side hustle. I would say that wasn't like kind of a job. I did work at Subway.
I was going to ask, yeah, I'd love to ask what people's first jobs were. Was that one of your first jobs at Subway?
Subway was my first job.
And how old were you when you were working at Subway? Because that's like a laughable first job. It's like making people sandwiches. Like, what do you know how to make sandwiches if you're like a teen,
I want to say 16. I might have been 15. I don't remember if it was sophomore, junior year. I think it was sophomore year. So I was 15. It was over the summer. And then I quickly joined a small bar exam coaching company as their computer tech person. They had like 5, 6 computers, and I don't know why, like 5, 6, 7 computers. People would come in and just do paralegal research. And for whatever reason, they just constantly had technical issues. I don't know why. I mean, things were not as reliable as back then as they are today. Computers last now, but like things would just keep breaking. And I used to disassemble and reassemble computers for fun when I was 12, 13. Like I was in that kind of boat. And then later that kind of parlayed into a computer tech job at CompUSA, fixing people's computers. And then later got a job fixing computers at Fry's Electronics.
So you go off. After school, you start all these different businesses, go on to do what I would consider from the outside looking in, all these incredible things, right? Your career, at least the way that it looks on paper, very impressive. Is there a moment somewhere early on that kind of sets your career on its current trajectory?
3 things came to mind. So I'd say the first one was seeing the dot-com boom, not necessarily seeing the dot-com boom. I didn't really know what the dot-com boom was, but I was a junior in college, and there was a classmate who was a year older than me, who I saw on the news as starting this company. And it was like a source code search engine or something. I don't remember exactly what it was. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like started their own company. And, I was always like, I went to a high school in South San Jose where really smart kids. I was like maybe top 20%, but definitely not like top 5%, right? It was just really, really smart kids. And so I had this like underdog chip on my shoulder. And I feel like immigrant parents kind of put that in you too as well. It's like, you can do better. You can do more. Like it's never enough, right? I remember being motivated like, wow, if so-and-so can start a company, I can start one too, right? And that summer basically took like some of the top kids out of the computer science department, because I was a computer engineering major, and say, hey, we're going to come up with some ideas and build something, right? Kind of in lieu of our summer internship at some level. And that's kind of where it started. So that was a very transformative event, because that, in some ways, going through that experience, obviously it failed in the end, but like we ended up getting connected with a bunch of people. We ended up winning the school business plan competition. We built something that people wanted. Like it was just that whole process. That was transformative event sort of number one. I think the second thing was I took a job in New York in, let's call it 2001. I was at a startup post-college that was going, everyone was laying off at that time because of the dot-com crash. They were down to like 8 people, and they're like, hey, Roger, I have to move you to halftime. I'm like, I can't do that, right? So I took a job at this company in New York, and I was a developer building mobile apps. And for the first time I realized, and it was like an awakening for me, that I was not the best developer in the room. Like I was the 3rd best developer in the room. And I realized at that point, I'm like, wow, there's always somebody better. And I know it's such a simple thing to recognize, but it made me think about this notion that like, I'm a big believer, lean into your superpowers. Like, what are things I can do that I think I'm the best? Like I'm in the top 5% or top 1% of people out there, right? And so that was just like a little bit of an aha. Now, again, it's easy to reflect back 20, 25 years later, but in the moment, you don't see these things happening. And then I would say the third sort of transformative thing is in 2003, I'm looking for a job. Another company, a lot of companies were shutting down at the time. A lot of people who graduated in that period just couldn't find jobs. I mean, that was a time. I remember some of my friends using some of my startups to fake their resume, fake it till you make it. It's tough, right? You just got to do what you have to do. And I had 4 job offers, and I can't remember the 4 companies. And 2 were for engineering roles and 2 were for product management roles. And I remember deliberating over that for a long time. I was so worried I'd lose my technical chops. I was like, oh, if I go into PM, I won't know how to code anymore. I'm not an engineer, blah, blah, blah. I was just scared, right? And I decided to go product. And, and I kind of faked it till you made it kind of interview, because I'd really never really worked in product, but I had built things on the side and, was learning, talking to customers, not realizing I had a knack for this. And that ended up becoming a super critical decision, which kind of shaped the direction of my career.
This episode is presented by Navattic. If you've been following me or you're a fan of this show, you know how bullish I am on the interactive demo space and how much I love the Navattic team. Done a ton of stuff with them over the years, and they just dropped a bunch of new features that are really exciting. First, they've got a new template library. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates that have the most common demo use cases and all of the best practices built in, help you go 0 to 1 in a few seconds. If you're not sure what to build, they also have a new AI storyboard generator. It's exactly how it sounds. You drop in a website URL or some copy or a landing page, whatever you've got, it reads the information, pulls out the key sections, and then builds a working product demo for you in a couple minutes. And after you've built your demo, you'll probably want to use your data as part of your go-to-market approach. They've got a bunch of plug-and-play demo playbooks where you can send that interaction data to your CRM. You can use it to trigger alerts, all kinds of good stuff. It's actually a bunch of the things that my team built manually. It took us forever when I was in-house, so I love this. And after you've built your demo, if you need to make any adjustments, if you're displaying numbers or data as part of that, they have a new table AI feature, which helps you to clean up that data in a more conversational way and at scale in just a few seconds. They have made it so stinking easy to use your product as your marketing tool without needing an engineer or heavy design work. You can get started with all of this in their free plan. Check it out at navattic.com/value to get started. That's navattic.com/value. This episode of the show is presented by Appcues. If you work in product-led growth, you know how important activating and engaging new accounts is. Turning those new accounts into active users is critical to your success in a product-led environment, and it's typically why activated accounts is a North Star metric for many growth teams. Certainly why my team spent years working on our onboarding experience when I was in-house, both at Wistia and at Postscript. And that's why I'm so excited that they're sponsoring the show. They are just as passionate about helping the product-led community and companies fix their onboarding and retention as I am. They are the leading product onboarding and adoption platform for both web and for mobile apps, and they've created tons of resources to help this community. They've got the Product Adoption Academy, which is where you can get a free masterclass, like think courses, templates, examples, all the good stuff to help you break through your current plateaus and level up your product chops. I've got a course in there. It's my Value First onboarding course where I share the exact playbooks that my team used to help us onboard hundreds of thousands of new users. You can check out my course at appcues.com/value. That's appcues.com/value. And you can follow that link and explore all the different programs they've got inside of the Product Adoption Academy. So you go on, you do all these other things after that, right? So that's kind of a turning point for you. You know, I want to double click on some of these speed bumps and some of the challenging moments along the way. So let's talk about a major mistake. Like, can you describe a time when you felt like, at least in hindsight, or maybe in the moment that you made a mistake at work, sort of what happened and what was at stake for you in the fallout? What comes to mind?
Well, I, for whatever reason, always kept building on the side. I'd have these jobs and I'd be building something, right? Like after my file sharing company kind of didn't make it out of college, even though I had investor calls and things like I was learning all kinds of and things were hard then, right? You didn't have the internet, you didn't have accelerators, you didn't have incubators, you just had to know people, right? Email wasn't even popularly used. You had to call people. It was just different. So I remember it's happened twice. I'm in New York as an engineer, and I'm spending like half my day at the job, like working on my side project on their computer. I shouldn't be doing that. I remember my manager ultimately was laid off there, but not for that. That was because they moved their engineering team to India and they were, running out of money. But I remember my manager saying, "Hey, Raj, can you stop working on your own thing all the time?"
And so did people know, like, did you talk about it or they just like peeked over once in a while and they just noticed it and said something?
I think some people knew, but I mostly was not really talking about it. It was a college dating site I was building. It was like pre-Friendster. It could have been Friendster. I made a couple mistakes there. I didn't know how to do some of the ops issues around how to make it scale. With the friend to friend was very hard to calculate. Like it was a computationally expensive thing. But that was sort of like, I should have taken that data point, like, I should more cleanly separate. Then I'm at Kodak Mobile and I started a little ringtone company on the side. And I then added a feature so you could make wallpapers too for your phone. And this is like in an era where it was very difficult to set your ringtone and wallpaper on your phone. Like back then was hard. There's pre-smartphone era, like, candy bar phones, whatever. And, because given that I was the mobile product manager for Kodak, right? Like at some point people could see I wasn't doing this work at work, but people knew I had this thing because it was successful. It was growing. You could buy it at Walmart and Best Buy and CompUSA was desktop software, right? And HR approached me one day and they're like, "Hey, Raj, we've come to learn that you built this thing, and we think this might conflict with your day job." And I'm like, "Well, it's completely separate. Actually, I built this thing and then I built it for you guys, after that. So Kodak has a wallpaper service, quite the opposite. But they're like, unfortunately, some people believe it could conflict. I think there's some jealousy there, right? You never know the real reason, but I think that's the real reason. And they asked me to resign. And so I signed this thing at severance and I resigned. It was kind of a lesson learned about separation of data. I learned later in my career, like all your Slack messages can be read. I know this, right? Just being founder, CEO, like nothing is private. And so now I'm like much, much better. Everything is cleanly separated. If I'm doing something, it's like, it's on my own time. I've gotten the legal part of risk taking, like, you become more aware of these things later in life. But that definitely was, in hindsight, thinking about that, you could say it was a mistake, but I would say the outcome was great because then I went full time on my ringtone business and it became a big thing.
I feel like this is the fear for anyone who has like a side hustle today, who's like, well, I know I need to promote it, but I'm like scared to talk about it, whether they, post on LinkedIn or on Twitter or whatever. And so for you, having that kind of come to fruition in that moment, was it scary or was it like, well, fuck it, I'll just go do this other thing. I've already got enough momentum doing it. I wanted to do it anyways. I guess that time that I'm going to do it full time is now, or was it before you felt like you were ready for that?
So it was totally scary. First of all, I've never been called into HR before.
Yeah, fair enough. Right. Even just that scary.
They give you like this legal stuff. And
okay, did you know what was coming? Sorry to interrupt you here, but did you know that was coming, or was it like, hey, got a second, and then you pop in and then everybody's sitting?
No, it's like, hey, Raj, like, I don't remember these meeting invites or whatever. Back then it was different, right? Like calendar today is now like a thing, but I remember there was a request for me to go, and everyone's in the office, right? So you just walk over into an office. It's like with HR, and then they had printouts and they showed me the screenshots of my product and whatever, right? And I was a kid. I was like 25 years old, 24. I graduated college in 3 years. So I was like young, and it was scary, right? It was scary, just like when I launched my file sharing product in college, right? There was like all these file sharing networks getting sued, right, by the recording industry. And so it's just like, well, what do you do if you, when I had this ringtone company, we had C&D sent from competing products because they knew we were like, it was just like a side hustle business, but they had venture dollars and legal dollars and all, so those things were scary. I didn't understand that. Now, multiple startups turned over, exits, whatever. Like, I understand the legal game as well as anyone. Now we have ChatGPT and we have all these other resources, different games, so I have much better affordance and tolerance of risk. But you're always scared when it comes to risk. I think the second thing is financial stability. Like, I wasn't rich, right? I'm building these things and making money on the side, but I'm not like, I didn't have an exit event. Fortunately, I could still live at home. I could still be on my parents' health insurance for up to a certain age, or things like that. And so there was some benefit there. Collecting unemployment was actually material, like because you're not making tons of money. So it's like, oh, it's actually right. But like, those things are scary too. And I picked up a bunch of little consulting gigs while I was building out my ringtone thing. I certainly made a mistake of not selling it for multiple 7-digit exit because I thought I could get more. But they're always scary. And you still get that fear. It's just different levels. I don't think that's changed. Like, even today, there's still fear. There's still anxiety, right? Like ChatGPT is creating as much productivity as it is anxiety across the entire workforce. Those things don't change. I think the difference is I can be a little bit more thoughtful and intentional now because I have been through, I've had a couple reps to practice.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, so I think you shared 2 stories there where you were in-house building your thing on the side, and then that caused a little bit of friction. I'm curious for you from the other perspective. So being a leader, if you've ever been in a position where someone on one of your teams had a side gig or a side hustle that you knew about, and if your previous experience changed how you approach those situations.
There's like 2 mantras here. There's like one camp that says you should have side hustles. It helps you grow, helps you build, right? They don't necessarily define what a side hustle is. Like, it's not like playing with open source code and hacking something on a weekend to learn some new technology versus like you're running a full nother SaaS product and, like doing A to Z. But that's sort of one camp. And there's another camp like, hey, we've got like so much stuff to do to succeed. Like, I need all your focus and attention on this. How do you have time to do anything else? Right. Yeah. And I will say which may not be a popular take, I've been mostly in that camp. And that's mostly just because I mostly had my own startups. And in my startups, I'm running like crazy hard and we're just trying to survive. We're running through Saturdays, running long hours. It's like, we have so much to do. Like, how do you, like it would bother me that you have like a whole side business that you're doing. I would say within a larger company where, yes, there's accountability, but it's just different, right? It's like, there's a lot more emphasis and focus on upskilling and growing your talent base. It's a different mentality too. Like, it's not about, in startups, unfortunately, particularly early stage startups, time is not an affordance. And so if somebody doesn't perform, you unfortunately just replace. We have to go find somebody who can do this. In a large company, the mental model is quite different. It's like, if somebody's not performing, it's like, well, have we identified what they're great at? And then are they in the right role? So it's more about upskilling and reorganizing your team so we can lean into everyone's superpower, and we always have a bench of like additional people that can assist. And so it's a very different way of thinking. And in that model, I don't know if I would go all out and say you should go be building a full side business, but like if you have something on the side that's a passion area that helps fuel and keeps you, energetic and not burnt out and whatever, that's perfectly fine. So there's a gray line here, depending on whether it's like my own startup and what phase the startup is in. But the first 10 employees in your own startup is pretty much the make it or break it. Like it's all about team, and everyone is so mission focused in that first 10. Of course, things change when you get to a 50 or 100 or 500 or whatnot, right? But I assure you, every top startup in the Valley that's crushing in growth, those teams are also working like crazy.
Probably the most nervous I've ever been in a professional setting is when I told my last CEO that I was building something on the side and that I was going to promote it a little bit publicly, because if I didn't, it would never make it off the ground. If it never made it off the ground, I would always regret it for the rest of my life. It was the most nervous I've ever been. I did dry runs with my coach. I like role played it. I prepped for it. He was like, dude, this is how I started this company. Was like, I did what you're talking about. He was like, go do it. If we ever have to talk about impacting your your performance here, then like we got a different issue. Let's never have that conversation. So work hard to make it so. And like, I'm rooting for you. And I was like, oh, that's dope. I thought it was going to go the other way. I thought he was going to say, look, man, we need all of you here and we need, 130% of you. So like this, I thought it was going to be that. And thankfully it wasn't.
I think, so some of this is maturity. And as I've gotten older, right? Like I used to be very anti-remote work, but now I can see like places where I think it's amazing. So I think just as I've gotten older, I have a better sense of how this works, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So 100% agree.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. All right, so switching gears a little bit, have you ever been in a position where you've been either passed over or maybe someone said, hey, you're not ready for the next step yet? What comes to mind for you there?
The default answer is, there's a joke in the Valley. They say, if you know a lot of VCs, you're bad at fundraising. Well, the reason is because you're pitching a lot. So I've been passed on many times, right? And I hate to say it, like all founders, I have my own version of a list of folks that I feel like in my head that kind of ghosted me or whatever it might be from a venture perspective. Like, I don't want to raise these folks. A very specific example, I was at a startup in 2008, 2009. It was a mobile browser startup. I was one of the first hires there. It was a very hot company at the time and just under Series B. The business was pivoting and we had a new CEO. It was a consumer browser, but pivoting into something more enterprise focused. And I was running business development, which was like just a new role. Like I'd never done it before. Like I've been weirdly fortunate in my career to work to engineering management, product management, QA, CEO, business development, not finance, but like in these different leadership roles. And new CEOs pretty quickly is like, hey, Raj, we need to hire an SVP of sales, right? Like I need to report to this person. And I felt, I was probably like 28 years old at the time. I felt like it felt bad. It felt like, wow, what do you think? I'm not good enough. I can't do it. I can't grow into it. Right. And I think there's a lot of ego, you're in your 20s, right? Like you just like, you think you can do it all. And you realize later, like, no, lean into the things you're really good at and then go get fractional experts for everything else. And everything's a learning opportunity. So anyway, new person's hired and he was great. And I don't want to mention names and whatnot, but he came on board and I learned a lot, right? But I didn't even see it. Like I'm learning, it was going fine, but I was so ego hit by this. I voluntarily left after like 3 or 6 months.
I was going to ask if you had debated leaving and been like, nah, fuck this. Like, I'm not staying here. They don't appreciate me. If there's any version of that in your story.
Well, and the other thing too is like, it's kind of related to even the question before. I used to fight like employee churn, right? Like, but now I think there's such a thing as healthy churn. Like you hit a certain point where you just kind of, your daily mood becomes negative. It's like healthy to churn within an organization, related to doing side hustles or whatnot. So the same thing is true here, where I didn't realize at the time, but I was becoming negative. Like I was becoming like, what do I think about the place, or how are things going? Like it was like a bearish opinion. And it was sort of like, well, if I'm not in it, then I don't want anyone to succeed. Right. It's just like terrible. It's like not a good way of thinking. It's just so bad. And I think this combination of ego, I think combination of age, not understanding, wisdom, all these sorts of things. Right. And so I left within 3 to 6 months because like it started with that. Then it was like, oh, well, we don't need you in the board meetings anymore. Right. Like these things feel like, oh, okay, I'm getting like kind of iced out. And, to be clear, I was not a trained salesperson. I learned a lot from that SVP of sales. And I reflect back on that. And it was super eye-opening experience because it made me realize that there's so many experts in so many different domains and everything's a learning opportunity. And later, it also made me even feel totally comfortable to be introspective enough to say, hey, if we're growing in a company and I'm CEO and I don't feel like I'm the right person at this stage, like I'll step to the side and work on the thing I'm really good at, and we'll get somebody else. And I have a much better sense of what I'm good at now too, right? Like I just didn't know. In your 20s, you're like, the mental model was like, if I'm not good at it, I'm going to go learn it and do it. In your 40s, the mental model is like, if I'm not good at that and I don't, and I also know I don't enjoy it, I'm going to go hire somebody for that and I'm going to go do the stuff I'm good at.
So it's like a little bit of, I think earlier in our convo, you mentioned, like, I've always had that underdog mentality. I think you said going back to high school, you were like, yeah, I was top 20%, but I wasn't top 5%. So I kind of looked around and I saw other, and so kind of a little bit of that as well, right? So a little bit of like that, well, I'm not good enough for y'all. Like, well, fuck it then. That's how I would feel. I mean, I don't want to project, but based on what you shared, it sounds like a little bit of that popped up as well.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think through age, you get a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
But I will say sometimes the amount of risk and the way I thought about things in my 20s, where it's like I could do anything. There is something about that beginner's mind, like ignorance is bliss. This is like a big Salesforce culture sort of thing. Whereas now I run through, so what some people call like the maze, like in my head, where it's like going through like 80 permutations of everything, saying all the reasons it's not going to work. It's like analysis paralysis. There is something to be said about that time, but I guess the TLDR here is what works in the past doesn't work again. So you're certainly learning, but you make the same mistakes over and over again.
My primary business is I coach, and I coach people that have my former job. So I used to lead cross-functional growth teams. Now I coach people who do that. And one of my clients, he's actually leading a marketing team, but they're focused on PLG. So anyways, he's one of my clients. They're going to get leveled. So they have been leading the team for some period of time. They were like the top IC, have been the head of the capability for the past, I forget, 9 months or something like that. And now their CEO wants to bring on like a VP. And so they'll get leveled. And they're struggling with everything that you just talked about because they love the company, they love the mission, they want to stay. But now they're feeling a little, my words, not theirs, but maybe a little bit of resentment. And they're feeling a little embarrassment on how it looks, because it looks like they got demoted, or at least that's the story that they're telling themselves. So what's your advice to someone who's like the person who I just shared, who's in like the messy middle of this and can't see the perspective that you shared just yet?
I think one thing I've been through public failure, which most people have not really experienced. So if you've grown up in an environment where everything is so like you're always striving to be the best, and you work in a larger company, you almost have ways to deflect failure, right? Like particularly in large companies, product didn't work well, blah, 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 team didn't do this, or blah, blah, team or management didn't support this or whatever, right? When you're CEO, like you can't blame anyone. And then you go through public failure, and like once you kind of go through that, like you just don't care anymore. It's like, it's hard to explain, but I just don't fear it. I have a lot of credit to founders who can just pivot, because those are really hard. Like publicly, you have to admit that this wasn't working, right? In front of all these people, you're moving in a different direction, right? Like that is really hard. And actually to execute that, because it's not steering a motorboat when you have 2-3 people on your team, it's steering a motorboat. You have 100 people on your team, and you have to turn a team like that. It's like steering an aircraft carrier. Like if you get so many people on board, right? And so thinking about your your colleague here, or I guess kind of running through that, I think the big unlock for me is everything's a learning opportunity. And I think a macro thing that's changed is management tracks and IC tracks are basically equalized now. Like, I mean, we have top tier superstar AI people making more money than most of their managers in that organization, right? And so this wasn't the case 2 decades ago. There was like clear management track got paid more, but ICs make more money than managers in many instances, right? And so I think this is more a question of like, what do you enjoy doing? And the higher up you go, the more time is spent managing upwards, doing updates, HR, administrative, PowerPoint presentations. That's why all of them have chief of staffs, because they don't actually even enjoy it. That's the irony. They hire somebody else to outsource it, right? But if you enjoy the craft, right? Like if you're like actually doing the tactical execution, whatever, you're going to hate the other side. So I don't know if I have great feedback. I know it's hard to swallow the ego pill, and I also believe that there is some truth to this. Like if you're on a rocket ship, you should just hang on, because you're going to learn no matter what. And you can certainly parlay it in other roles. And career is an arc. A job is just like a dot in that arc, right? I think some combination of what I've said, maybe one of those things will resonate. But man, it's tough. Like I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, it is tough. The thing that I think they're most, aware of or trying to mitigate is how it looks to their peers. I think they have their own personal feelings about it and probably can, based on my understanding, have a similar perspective to the one that you share, but they're just nervous that it doesn't look good, that it looks like they couldn't do the job or that they couldn't hack it, when in reality, companies likely hiring someone who knows the answer and can get to it faster. And it's not really a knock on them and more a pro for who they're going to hire, but it's hard to see through when you're in the middle of it.
And what's really unfortunate is how many decisions are made in an organization or in your career because of what you think people expect of you versus what you actually want to do. A good example of this is if you're dealing with a new products organization in any company, like building new products, the best path to success is to decline more resources, which is super counterintuitive because startups make better decisions when they have less people. They have less money, resource constrained. They don't choose A and B, they choose A or B because they have to make decisions. But it doesn't look good, because it looks good to have a lot of people. And this is in conflict. Like, is your leader there to win or is your leader there to look good? And so many decisions in companies are made because of what looks good. And this happens with your career too, right? Like I have a good example of this. After I exited 2 startups ago, I could have comfortably taken senior leadership roles at ranges of companies, right? I was coming out like pseudo VP of product at Salesforce after the acquisition. And I didn't. I passed up on some pretty ridiculous opportunities, not because I wasn't interested in them, because I had this weird thing in my head, like, oh, people expect me to start another company because I've started a company. I got to start another one. That's what people expect. And so I started my last company, and it was a mediocre outcome, right? Obviously to Mozilla and where I am now, but that's okay. The point being, like, why did I make a decision on what people expected of me versus what I really wanted to do? And so even here's me 20 years later, everything I've learned, I'm still doing that, right? And so I think about that. People talk about financial freedom, but there's also this sort of like something about this, like, I don't care freedom. And I don't know what the great unlock is there. And there are people who operate in that way, and I have a lot of respect for that. I feel like I'm closer to that now. I just don't care. Like, I'm just going to do what I want to do. But definitely, it took a lot longer to get there than I thought. And I don't know how much of that is just simply age and acceptance.
One of the themes that's come up a few times over the last 15 minutes or so is decisions. You've talked about making public decisions that you've had to undo. You've talked about making tough decisions in your own career. I'm curious for you as a leader, as a CEO, as a builder, what's one of the tougher decisions that you've had to make? What comes to mind for you?
You're making lots of hard decisions every day. I would say the funny thing about decisions is it's hard, but you can't reflect on it in the moment, right? So you always have to look back. And so I'm thinking about a decision 2 startups ago, a product-related decision. That was a very hard decision. And it was hard not because it's not what I thought we should do. It was hard because of an entire company, my entire team, saying I was making the wrong decision. And so I remember in that moment, and it was really a decision around the direction of a product. There was an audience, basically the entire team felt we should launch this second product, and I said no. And I was, Series A, venture-backed CEO, learning, right? And I'm in my mid-30s, early mid-30s. And I went and read this book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, but I kind of took like 3 months. Like it took me like 3 months to kind of go through this, like talk to everybody. First feedback you get from everyone is like, well, talk to everybody, right? The feedback's always like, oh, drive consensus. Well, you have to talk to everybody, you have to align everybody, but it's really hard. You have your board saying 3 different things, right? They're not in agreement. You have your investors saying different things, your team saying different things, right? I went and read this book, and it had, Ben Horowitz talks about like, nobody has more information than the CEO, right? Like you have all the context, all the data, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like, you ultimately have to make this sort of decision. And it was just really hard, right? I made this decision, almost lost a co-founder because of it, because I did, peer review feedback. He was like thinking of leaving because he disagreed. And it turned out to be the right decision, but, it could have been the wrong decision. And who knows, right? And I think about it because it was definitely one of the hardest decisions, because it's rare when things are going sideways in a company, everyone becomes a backseat driver. And that's the hardest situation. Like when you have that, and most startups are in that kind of state, right? Very slow growth, maybe purgatory. And when everyone's a backseat driver, as a CEO, you're spending 50% of your time just trying to manage when you want to be spending time building and growing. And it's exasperating, right? And part of it is because nobody has any strong conviction. And if nobody has any strong conviction on the strategy, it's a recipe for like a vicious death cycle. So at some point you have to like just make a bet. And it's so much easier to just defer versus make a decision that's wrong. But when you realize that you're doing that, you have to just make a quick decision and then accept that if I'm wrong, I'll correct it. But you're not going to learn if you don't make the wrong decision or the right decision. The only way you can learn is from making a decision. So you got to make a decision. So maybe that's one example.
You mentioned afterwards getting some feedback from the co-founder who said, I was really demotivated by this situation, almost left. I was curious if you knew the stakes in the moment, like if you felt that because you had a different opinion than the team that was recommending to you, if you were nervous in the moment when you were, maybe before you had shared the decision, but when you had conviction personally about what you wanted to do and some clarity there, if you were worried that you were going to lose the team.
It would have been very painful to lose my AI co-founder this is before, he was out of Stanford Research Institute. This is before like AI was a hot thing, right? This is like 2014 timeframe. It would have been painful. Certainly knew the stakes that were involved. At that time, I used to fight churn. Like I didn't want churn. And, I used to even advertise that I had like 95, 98% like employee retention rate. Like people believed in the mission and the vision. Obviously my perspectives on those things have changed. I think I took a data-driven approach originally, and that sort of didn't work because there's always counter data. Like there's always counter examples, right? It's like all about cherry picking data. An emotional approach didn't sort of work, right? I think about that sometimes in the context of strategies around consensus building. There's a lot more data on this stuff now. And now you have ChatGPT, right? Which can give you like levels of input and feedback on how to approach things. I don't know if it would have been easier today. That's the crazy part. If the same scenario happened today, I don't know if it would have been any easier. I think the biggest difference, which is double-edged, is I've had some success now. So there is this blind faith, like, oh, trust Raj. He's been through this before and he's had success. So, we should go with his gut, right? Those kinds of decisions happen all the time in startups, right? Maybe not at that level of, stakes, but they happen all the time. And in an equivalent fashion, there was a decision we made because of some of my idealistic perspective around what sort of metrics I wanted to achieve around product market fit and engagement, where I didn't focus on growth by launching new platforms of our product that maybe resulted in an acquisition outcome that was 1/3 of what it could have been based on what some of our competitors had gotten acquired for. And so you just can't predict these things, but I can always reflect back. But you just don't know. Like you've worked in growth yourself. Should I put more fuel on growth or should I put more fuel on retention?
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feel like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. If we could go back to the example that you're sharing about potentially launching a second product. How did you actually share the outcome of your decision? So you said it took me a couple months. I'm kind of reading this book. I'm gathering all this information in parallel. At some point, you had clarity for what you were going to do. And you said you weren't going to launch a second product. How did you actually share that decision? Do you remember? Did you send out like a memo? Did you film a loon? Did you get everybody in the room and tell them? Did you tell them one-on-one, then get everybody together to kind of rah-rah and get everybody excited again? How did you actually do it?
So my default strategy was to meet everybody one-on-one, which is exhausting. And at the time, I used to do one-on-ones with everybody. Like I would do step level one-on-ones. And so like, I don't even do one-on-ones anymore. Like I've completely changed my management approach. And I tried to share those discussions privately and then kind of memorialize it, right? And then kind of send out a team-wide email or like at a weekly all hands. So I'm pretty sure, I don't remember the exact details around that flow, but I'm pretty sure that's what I did. The thing is, you can kind of tell the sentiment of a team based on how much like inter-discussion they're having. Like, are they having a lot of hallway chatter? Like, it's like, oh, okay, there's clearly some anxiety or things going on that people aren't happy about or whatnot, right? And so, it definitely, I remember there's just a lot of people going for walks at that time. It's like, I disagree with Raj, blah, blah, blah.
And so how do you keep people engaged when that happens? What do they call that? We want you to disagree and commit, not disagree and meddle or like be a detractor.
Disagree and commit, I think, is like a new, like I think that emerged in like the last 5 or 7 years, that right, like that sort of that framing. Some people don't agree with that either. Like they sort of feel like disagree and commit is almost too harsh. It should be like everyone should get a say, and we need healthy contention, and we need to find common things we agree on first. There's a lot of strategies in conflict resolution, debate management, dispute management, whatever. But I probably was a little bit more authoritarian. I wasn't disagree and commit. I was kind of like, we're doing this. I don't want to talk about this anymore, right? Like it's like it's been mentally exhausting. And that period was tough. I remember, you're already not sleeping well when you're a founder CEO. But I remember just like every startup I've had, particularly the venture-backed ones where you feel like you're running on the treadmill, I had many moments where I'm like, I wish I could just reset and like it's never happened and I'm just doing a regular job. So you definitely have these like days you wake up, you just feel like you could quit. You just don't want to do it. Like it's just too stressful, right? The opportunity cost and all that kind of stuff. And then there's days you wake up and you're like super enthusiastic, right? So it's a very mood dependent. I'm sure there's coaching that can help with through that stuff. But I remember during that period, like it was bad, and my health gets really bad in those situations too. So it's like a combination of things. I stop exercising, I start eating poorly, right? I'm just like, you're just stressed. You may not be at the office all the time. People talk about 80-hour work weeks. Like nobody actually, or there's some people actually work 80 hours, but you're thinking about work 80 hours a week for sure. Like, like you may not be physically like writing an email, but you're at your kid's birthday party and it's while you're talking to some other dad, you're thinking about some release in the back of your head. Like that's not an engaged conversation. You become disengaged, right? It creates a lot of pressure on families, on friends, the whole thing, right? So doing a startup is not like people think about like when you do it in your own way and you don't raise money and whatnot, it's way different. But the minute you're like on a treadmill, like you're really signing up to run.
And in this particular instance, or maybe in other instances, do you role play this type of sharing? Like in the way that you're talking about where you've made this decision, there's going to be some disagreement. You don't want to keep talking about it. Are you really intentional about how you want to share and what you want to say and what you don't want to say and how they might react and how you want to react to their, are you thinking about that? Or are you just moving fast and you read the book and you just said, fuck it, let's go?
I've gotten a little bit better about this. So I think on some things there, I would definitely run it through HR or run it through somebody and say, hey, does this sound right? Does this tone sound right? I may send it to a friend, not in the company. Like, does this sound right? Before I send an email out or whatever. I would always simulate questions. That was something I learned from the SVP of sales. Like he would go in and like, he would draw out like who's in the room, what are the types of questions each of these people would ask. Like, I was like, oh, that's really neat, right? And now you hear about these things, that's like a normal communication competency, like simulate the types of things people would ask in the room. And it just takes like an extra few minutes before the meeting, but it makes a big difference. I wasn't so intentional at the time. I was doing these things more subconsciously, but I probably should have done more, but definitely when it came to more written communications, I was doing more simulation. And if you think about it today, I do a lot more, right? Today, it's like kind of built into my rubric. The other thing that's also built in is trying to understand incentives, which is not something I necessarily understood as well back then. Sales teaches you these things. You work in sales, you think about the people in the room, and it's like, okay, what is each of their incentives and how do I win over their incentives, right? You think about how do I build I was always good at the EQ, like building the emotional connection and making it feel personal. And so we became friends. But like understanding incentive structures, things like that, like I'm much better at that stuff now, like the people sort of skills. And I think that really, I think some of that is just learning through age and experience, multiple companies, working with multiple people, different environments and whatnot. And now obviously when you can blend both of it, right? Like the emotional connection and then also, just simulation and competencies and incentives, you can just become much more persuasive.
I feel like AI is so good for that too, where you're like, here's who's going to be there. Here's sort of their background. Can you generate a list of a couple questions or pushback that they're likely to bring up, that type of thing. I felt like I tried to do this in the past. Like I shared the example when I role played like what my CEO might react when I was going to share that I was going to be talking about my side hustle publicly on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But most folks don't really get trained on that, at least not at startups, not in the background, the past that I came from. We get no manager training. You just all of a sudden get a title change and maybe some direct reports and you're supposed to know the answers and what to do. But like no one ever pulled me aside and shared that shit with me.
I think, some of this came from fundraising. So fundraising, you're always thinking about who is the fund, who's the partner at the fund, have they invested in the space before? Are they technical, not technical? What types of questions they might ask? One of the strategies I used to use is I would build a deck. I still use this strategy in sales. I have a deck. My deck might be like 10 slides. It's just a short presentation of what we're selling or what we're building or what I'm pitching or whatever. But then I have an appendix with 80 slides, like a ton of slides. And the appendix is not trying to be like this beautiful appendix. The appendix, which I don't share, but I bring to the meeting, literally has one question on each slide. The title of the slide is the question. And I've simulated all the possible things you might ask. And I have a slide to answer each of those things. And so something comes up, I pull up the supporting slide and then I voice it over. This is a very effective strategy I learned from that SVP of sales that he used going into these. And these are high, he's doing strategic sales, right? These are multi-million-dollar sales. He can't get anything wrong. So I've gotten better at it. But again, you have to be intentional and it takes time. You can't do all of these things and then like still feel like you're running fast. I do think as PMs, we are expensive routers at some level and we have to move fast. I think it is happening more subconsciously than it was in the past.
You've talked a few times throughout our conversation around things that either your thinking has evolved on or your experience has kind of changed over the years and your perspective has changed. I'm curious for you if there's been a mindset shift or a habit or any rituals that have had big impacts on your career.
So one, and I kind of acknowledged some of these things early on, was recognizing you can't be great at everything. And so that was a reframing of thinking. Like previously there was accounting, finance. I'm like, I can do that myself. I can figure this out. And there's like HR functions, but I can figure this out, legal, whatever. I realized like, that's not a good value of my time. Like I know what I'm really good at. And like, I should not be spending my time there and trying to level up in those places. That's a reframing of thinking. Tightly coupled with that has really changed my thinking is actually thinking of us like video game characters, which is a kind of maybe a weird analogy, but the point being is video game characters have a set of attributes, right? They have like strength and agility and, shield and whatever, right? Speed and whatnot, right? And we have a set of attributes too, right? Like depending on what your function is, like you're a CEO, you have like 50 competencies, like what breaks down a great CEO. And my belief is nobody, I don't care if it's a product manager or designer, nobody's like top 1% in all those competencies, right? So the first step is can you break these things down into a set of competencies? And then can you figure out what your superpowers are? And what are those sort of competencies? And when you start thinking about things in that way, it's like leaning into your strengths and knowing where to engage. I just think things feel a lot less stressful, right? Because you're much more willing to delegate where it's not your strength, but you also know like I have high taste here. Like this is something I can do really well. I should really lean into this. So I think maybe it's the same point, but I think those two sort of things were like big unlocks for me.
What I like about that as an analogy is in the video game world, I'm not a gamer, but like I understand the analogy and the point that you're making. Sometimes you go to a new level or like you play a new world and you don't like it. Or you get there and it requires a different set of skills, and then you pick up new things, and some things make you better and some things you don't know are going to hurt you. And that's part of the, it's part of the journey. Then you make it through that level and you get to the next one. And some of those levels are multiplayer. And then you make connections or you meet mentors or whatever it is. And so I often think about that, but through a different lens. It's interesting to think about from a skill development perspective.
Well, and I've actually, even within my product management teams at Mozilla, taken that exact approach. So basically took the PM role. There's some public stuff out there about what are the 30, 40 competencies that make a great PM. And then we actually do weekly sessions together. We may choose 3 or 4 things off that list, and those are the things we'll tackle for this year. We'll do 3 months of weekly sessions, just like going into that one competency together. So maybe it's product sense and people want to like improve on cognitive empathy, design sensibility or whatever it might be. So we'll spend 8 weeks just like looking at case studies of like, how does this UX make you feel? Or how does this user experience make you feel? Right? Like, why did they design it in this way? Whatever, right? Like, because I do believe you can level up in these competencies. And I think there's a really interesting graph here. If you take any one of these like attributes, like a video game character, there's people who are born with a certain baseline, right? So like some people will certainly start higher, and some people are better public speakers, they're just better communicators, whatever, right? And you can decide like, okay, is my goal to get to median, or is my goal to get to top 5%? Like, where do I want to be? I have to think of myself as like, what are my differentiators, right? Like, we're in a world now where everything is just getting more specialized. Like, certainly you're generalist at some level, but you have specializations that you're the top 1% at, right? And you're getting paid for that, right? Like, these researchers getting hired for hundreds of million, they're the top 1% in this one thing, right? Like, maybe their other competencies are not there. Maybe they're below baseline on a whole bunch of other things, right? So you can certainly improve, right? Through training, through practice, through repetitions, and it's work. Like, it's uncomfortable. You may not want to do it. People want to do the same thing that they've been doing a certain way their whole career, whatever. But the second thing is now we have ChatGPT, right? And ChatGPT also resets some of these curves, because if you take the employee and you take these different attributes and certain competencies, and then you go the same employee with the same curves, but using AI as an assistive tool, right? Like, it's almost like your Neuralink. I think of ChatGPT as the Neuralink. People think we need something in the brain. Well, we already have it. We have ChatGPT in our pocket, right? And you take that, their curve looks different now, because all of a sudden they've improved on a whole bunch of things because of AI assistance. Now the question is, what is their, like, in this new set of graphs, where do they want to become top 1%, right? So there is a level where you need certain sensibility and taste, but the real loser in this situation, and maybe loser is not the right word to use, is those that are not trying to improve, so not introspective. And obviously those people are like hyper curious people, hyper learners, whatever. And those not adopting AI, I would be concerned.
So you mentioned goals. For you at this stage in your career, what are yours? Right? So you're in-house at Mozilla. Do you think you'll go start another company? Gonna retire? Gonna do something totally different? Like, what? Because you've talked about the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, right? You've talked about the highs and you've talked about some of the challenges. I'm just curious where you go. I would say
there's 2 goals for me. So from a startup perspective, I joke with people, I can't get past first base, right? So I've had multiple 8-digit exits, but can't get to 9, can't get to an IPO, right? So in my head, there's still this thing like, can I take a business the whole way, right? So that's sort of like one side of me. The other side of me is I think a lot about employee archetypes versus stage of the product or stage of the company. And if you think about like new startups or products early in their life cycle, you might be leaning into people who are more experts in their craft, visionaries, right? And you think about like product companies that are like very mature, you're looking at people who can like figure out how to get 1% improvement in this particular flow. Operators, they're looking at efficiencies and whatnot, right? And so that's a very different kind of way of thinking. It's a very different way of organizing your teams. And I don't have a lot of experience there. Like, most of my career has been early stage. It's like 0 to 1, crafts work, the tactical, the hands-on, the IC, thinking about vision and where we're going to go and whatnot. And so part of me also is intrigued by like, do I even enjoy that stuff? I think I don't, but I've never tried it. So some of that's also quite interesting. And I'd say the third thing, from a goal perspective, so I'm kind of going through this like in my own head. What do I want to learn next? I know what I'm good at. Like, I know the easy path is to do what you're doing, like what I already know I'm good at. But like, I like learning new things, right? is the bucket of like, what is it like when you manage a really large organization? Like, I have no idea, right? Like organizational design, it's like a whole different ball game of like things. And I have a strong suspicion I'm going to terribly not enjoy it, but I'm curious what it's like. Try it for a year and it's like, you know what? I don't enjoy this. I don't want to do this anymore. Right. So those are some of the things in my head from feeling like rounding my shape, right? I'm jello in motion and I'm taking shape over my career arc, and like little bits are falling off and it's hardening. And these feel like gaps in my shape. Like I don't like that I want to learn that would help me clarify. Odds are I'm going to take an easy path and kind of just go do my own thing next, right? That's in some ways my easiest path, but certainly think about these other things.
Well, and that feels like it's living your values, right? I feel like multiple times in our convo, you've said, I got to do the things I'm good at. I got to figure out what I'm good at. I got to do those things. It's okay to not be good at the other things. And so it's kind of interesting hearing you talk through it after you sharing sort of your framework for making decisions like that in the past, which is cool.
There's always a curious ignorance, right? Like I just don't know. I've never even done those things. So I don't even know I'm not good at them.
Yeah, well, you got to see what's over the fence sometimes.
Correct.
Dude, thank you for coming on and sharing your story and a little bit of the game here. Anything that you haven't said that you want to say directly to the listeners who are thinking about their own journeys and some of the speed bumps along the way?
I would say the most common question I get is, hey, Raj, I have an idea, but, it's not the right time. It's like, and I will say there's people I know who try to plan everything down to like, I'm going to have a kid when I'm 29. It just doesn't work that way, right? It's never a bad time. If you have something you want to build and do, you'll regret it. Time will pass. I understand we're all trying to achieve certain levels of financial stability. That's a never ending project, right? Life is not going to materially change. And so I guess my macro there is just be comfortable with taking more risk. I think too many ladder careers. We need more map careers. I think it's going to unlock new levels of creative expression. Vibe as a modality is basically doing that too. And AI is enabling this because it's giving you access to those fractional experts. So if you're thinking or sitting on something and you want to go build it, do it. This is a great time. It was a great time 5 years ago, and it was a great time 10 years ago, and it'll be a great time 5 years from now. But last thing you want is to be like so old or so tired, it's like too late and you kind of miss that boat.
And for folks who are listening that want to connect with you, where should we send them? What should we put links to in the notes below?
My LinkedIn, I'm active on Twitter, writing about startups, VC, AI there as well. Or my Linktree if you want to see all the various products I've built over the years. And of course, quick shout out, building a lot of new products at Mozilla. I'm going to highlight Solo. That's one of them. So I'm omnipresent on the web, maybe too much so.
Raj, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you, Andrew.